The thing that killed my friends tried to sell me car insurance to protect the identities of the dead. I'll just call my friends Tom, Dick, and Harry. Me. You can call John. We'd known each other since the 3rd grade and always been thick as thieves. The year this all happened, the stars had aligned and we were all free for the Memorial Day weekend. So we decided to drive a few miles north of where we lived to go camping in a small state park. We loaded up Tom's car with supplies and grabbed a cooler full of hot dogs and beer before setting out. And by sunset, we were all ready for a great weekend. That was when he arrived. He was a tall, clean-shaven man, dressed in a polo shirt and khakis who smiled like a painted doll. Almost at once, I noticed a bruise on his forehead that looked pretty nasty. He stepped out from the tree line just as we were settling down to eat and startled us half to death. It was a public campsite, but slightly out of the way, so we hadn't really expected anyone to walk through. Still, he wasn't doing anything wrong, so we just nodded and waved when he looked at us. "Hey guys," he bounded over. "My name's Dave. Don't you just love camping?" As he spoke, he stuck out his hand to shake, that too wide grin never faltering. Yeah," I muttered awkwardly, accepting his hand, which despite the manic force he applied to everything else was a limp, wet fish of a handshake. "Nice car." He nodded towards Tom's old station wagon. "Who's it insured with?" "What?" Tom asked, somewhere between confused and annoyed. "I'm sorry." The man, Dave, laughed. "I sell auto policies for Paula Deen Insurance. Can't seem to turn it off when I'm not at work." "Right." Tom was looking around, bewildered. "So, we were just making dinner." He left that hanging, hoping Dave would take a hint, but the man just blinked at us vacantly. We were all a bit drunk now, but still we eyed each other nervously as he sat down on the other side of the fire. The smoke was blowing that way, and he must have been getting a face full of it, but he didn't show it. We all sat dumbfounded for a while before Harry reached into the cooler and pulled out a hot dog and put it on a stick, shrugging at the rest of our dirty looks. He handed it to Dave and asked, "You want some food?" "Sure," Dave said, his grin unmoving on his face. We all looked around at each other nervously as he cooked the sausage and put it into a bun. Harry slid his way. "Do you boys have any mayonnaise?" he asked, looking at us. "Yeah," I muttered, tossing him a bottle. "Great," he exclaimed as if I had given him the meaning of life. "Mayonnaise is the source of the aristocrat, you know." This bizarre statement was punctuated by him dumping an unpleasant amount of the white sauce onto the hot dog and proceeding to eat it in 2 bites, leaving ugly white smears around his face. It was then, staring at him in disgust, that I noticed the bruise on his forehead was gone. That wasn't possible. I rationalized that it had to have been a trick of the light. "What does that even mean?" asked Tom, looking slightly green at his table manners. Dave only looked at him and slowly blinked as if he hadn't understood the question before swallowing the last bite of his sausage. "Look, man." Dick straightened up. He had had the most to drink out of all of us, which is probably why he'd let it go this far, but I could tell from his tone he was beyond annoyed. "We came up here to camp with our friends for a weekend. We don't know you, so please leave." His jaw was tight as he spoke, and I watched, waiting for a fight, unsure if I would help him or pull him off. Dave only nodded, looking slightly sad, and said, "Of course, I don't mean to be a bother. If any of you are looking for a new insurance policy, however, you know where to find me." With that, he walked away down the dirt path towards the rest of the campsites. As he walked, I noticed there was dirt and sticks on the back of his clothes as if he had been lying down in the woods. "Okay," Tom hissed, looking around at the rest of us. "What the hell was that about?" "I don't know," Dick slurred drunkenly, a menacing glint in his eyes. "But he better not show up at our camp again if he knows what's good for him." "Okay, Dick, calm down," Harry said placatingly. "He's probably just lonely." "Lonely my ass," Dick muttered darkly. "There's something wrong about that guy." I didn't speak, but I knew what he meant. I couldn't put a finger on it, but something about Dave had been extremely wrong in a subtle way. Not just an awkward dude who didn't understand social norms, but genuinely wrong. "Did any of you guys notice he never blinked?" Tom asked, after a moment's pause, and I realized he was right. In all the time he had sat in that smoke, he hadn't blinked once. Hours passed as the fire burned down and the beer drained away, eventually leaving me alone in the early morning dark. Tom and Dick had hit the booze hardest and gone to bed hours ago, and Harry had just left to brush his teeth at the small cinder-block bathroom a little ways across the camping area. I would have gone with him, but somehow I didn't want to leave the camp unguarded with weird Dave around, so I was relieved when Harry came walking back into camp. Then, as he got close, I noticed how pale he was, as pale as a ghost. "You okay?" I asked, jumping to my feet and grabbed his arm to steady him. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just saw something weird is all." "Dave?" I asked, pointedly looking around as if expecting to see him grinning from the wood line. "What?" Harry asked, confused, then seemed to shake himself. "No. Nothing like that. It was some kind of animal, I think. I just caught a glimpse of it as it ran across the road. But it looked wrong. I tried to push, but he wouldn't or couldn't explain more, and eventually I let him go to bed and started making my own way towards the bathroom. I carried my big flashlight with me in case I saw whatever had spooked Harry and played it around the campsites as I walked. A few tents and a couple RVs were dotted around, but mostly the site was deserted, unusual because this was a holiday. Then I saw it, running across the road, maybe 20 yards in front of me. At first I thought it was a dog, but it didn't move right. I swung my flashlight around and managed to catch just a momentary view of it, and I understood why Harry had looked so scared. It was about the size of a large dog and hairless. That wasn't the creepy part. The creepy part was how it moved, almost spider-like. Startled, I stepped back, almost tripping when I felt a hand catch my elbow and steady me. It was Dave. "Hey, watch your feet. Don't want you getting hurt." This close, I noticed a few things about him. One was that his eyes were not only unblinking but dull and unfocused. Immediately my mind went to drugs, which would also explain his odd behavior. The other thing I noticed was how cold his skin was. It was a warm night, but he seemed almost chilled. "Hey, thanks," I stammered, straightening myself, before I turned back and ran the flashlight across the road. "Did you see that animal?" I asked Dave, not for any reason, but because it was easier than standing there with him in silence. Less creepy, or so I thought until he answered, saying, "That's not an animal," in a warning, almost urgent voice. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before, but only for an instant before the dull look returned. "Not an animal," I stammered. "Then what is it?" It had looked like, I don't know what. Pink and fleshy was all I could say for sure. "I don't know," Dave said cheerfully. "But if it damages your friend's vehicle, my company offers a great deal on all-inclusive insurance if you bundle your home and auto policies with us." His grin shone white in the moonlight as he made the rambling sales pitch, and I had had enough of him. So turning, I just walked away down the road. I made it to the bathroom and brushed my teeth, but when I went to leave the building and head back to camp, to my horror, Dave was standing right outside the door. He didn't say anything, just smiled at me, unmoving. In the light from the bathroom, I got a better view of him now and instantly noticed that he seemed somehow bulkier than before, as if he had gained weight around his midsection. But that didn't make sense. It had to be a trick of the light or something tied around his wrist. Under his shirt, perhaps. "What's your problem?" I shouted, fear creeping into my voice now. "No problems. We at Pauladine make insurance easy." He spoke with the same faux-friendly salesman's voice as before, but he sounded different. Sluggish and slurring his words, almost drunk. I was sure then that he was on drugs. Angrily, I just pushed past him, walking back to my camp. When I got there, I crawled into my sleeping bag and went to sleep. It was probably around 2 a.m. when I fell asleep, so I didn't wake up until close to none. When I did, I found the rest of my friends already up and nursing hangovers. Surprisingly, I felt fine. I hadn't gone as hard as Dick last night, but I had kept up with the others fine. We had a full day in the park, and then one more night before we drove back, and despite how weird the whole situation with Dave had been, I was determined to make the best of it. "So, guys, what do you want to do? Head down to the lake?" Harry asked, gesturing with his chin towards a path leading into the woods a little way from our tent. "I'd rather hike up the mountain," Tom said, shrugging, "but I'm good with whatever." Dick just grunted and took a deep pull from a coffee mug. A little worried after everything that had happened yesterday, I got the guys to help me load all our valuables into the locked car, and then we set off for the lake. It was actually 3 lakes, one roughly V-shaped, and the other 2 like eyes. They appeared from a distance, almost like 4 claw marks in the earth, which I supposed was why they were called the Bear Claw Lakes. They were cool and emerald green, reflecting the colors of the trees and sky and sparkling in the sun. The sort of place that makes you want to jump in and swim from just the sight of it. We spent a great few hours messing around, jumping off the rocks and pushing each other in, and although around 4 p.m. it started to lose its luster, it would have been a great day had it ended there. Tired, we began to make our way back up the winding trail to the campsite. The campsite had been completely trashed as we stood dumbfounded where the fire had been the night before and looked around at the slashed tent and upturned cooler. "Should we call the Rangers?" Harry wondered aloud. "No cell reception out here, we'll have to drive," Tom said, absently crouching down to examine a rip in one of the tents. "I'm gonna kill that damned salesman," Dick yelled, kicking an empty can into the woods out of frustration. It wasn't just Dick. Everyone immediately blamed Dave, even Harry, who always assumed the best about everyone. But somehow I didn't think so. The image of that pink, fleshy thing the night before, I couldn't get it out of my mind. It hadn't been a dog, and I think Dave had been right about it not being an animal either. At least not a wild animal. I had only caught a glimpse of it, but what it had looked like to me was a person. A person moving on all 4s with something seriously wrong with their joints. I had never been superstitious, but something about that thing had given me the heebie-jeebies in a way that had grown stronger the more time passed since I'd seen it. And that's when I noticed the thing, I don't know what to call it, hanging from the tree. It was made from a beer can taken from our cooler, the metal cut and flattened out like a sheet of paper, then folded origami style into a small figure of a man, his limbs bent at odd angles. He was tied with twine at the center of a triangle of sticks and hung from the nearest tree to the campsite, slowly twisting back and forth in the breeze, the metal glinting in the light of the evening sun. The thought of finding and confronting Dave flashed through my mind, but what would be the point? "Let's just go, guys," I said, pointing towards Tom's car. They all nodded, clearly uncomfortable to spend any more time here. When we all climbed into the car, it wouldn't start. Now, in a story, this is where everyone would have panicked. But there had been a few other campers around this morning, and whatever was wrong, we all assumed it could be fixed, or at least that we could get a ride to a mechanic. So we didn't worry much as we opened the hood to check the engine. The battery was missing, and looking under the car, we found the fuel line had been cut, or on closer inspection, seemingly chewed through by something, so leaving Tom and Dick to work on the car and watch what was left of our stuff. Harry and I went to find another camper who could help us, but there were none. The campsite was completely deserted now. With all the other guests seemingly having left while we were at the lake, both of us tried to rationalize and make excuses, but we both knew something was deeply wrong. It was getting late by then, and none of us had cell phones to try and call out. Even if we did, I doubt there would have been reception out where we were. So reluctantly, we made the choice to spend the night in the car and try to hike out in the morning. They all thought Dave was a psycho who was messing with us now. I still couldn't shake that thing from my mind. Neither could Harry, who admitted, to similar feelings when I questioned him, though his suspicions still lay with whoever or whatever Dave was. I couldn't blame him. From what he said, I gathered he hadn't gotten as clear a view of that thing as I had. The sun set, and the night came in like a blanket, almost calm until around 10 o'clock. An ear-splitting scream broke the stillness of the night. It was a man's voice, clearly in extreme pain, yelling and crying wordlessly. It seemed to go on for an hour, though it was only about 5 minutes, and then silence returned to smother us. "What the hell was that?" Tom hissed, looking around at us, just a pair of wide eyes in the dark. Nobody answered for a long moment until Dick exhaled a long breath and whispered, "We've got to find them. They're hurt." "Yeah, we can't leave someone out there, injured with that psycho." Harry's voice was shaky with nerves he was clearly fighting to suppress. "Bad idea." My voice was definite, and Tom agreed with me, but I could already tell they weren't going to be dissuaded. So I did the good thing as a friend, and I ran after them. A choice I would regret for the rest of my life. We slowly made our way through the trees, our flashlights playing around the woods looking for anything out of the ordinary. When we found it, or more specifically him, Dave was lying in a clearing about 10 feet from the edge of the woods, his face twisted in a mask of pain. His stomach was split in a ragged line from chest to crotch with blood pooling around the corpse. It opened him up, Harry said in a hollow voice, but among this scene of terror, one thing hit me with a sense of pure revulsion stronger than I have ever felt. Leading away from him in the blood were dozens of small, twisted human tracks, from what looked like very young children crawling on all fours. "Let's get out of here," I mumbled, stepping back from the clearing. As I stepped back, I raised my light a few inches and caught something across the clearing, like a baby with a broken back standing on its hands and feet splayed out, insect-like beside it. Its hands and feet turned the wrong way. Then as I watched, it raised its little head, mouth dripping with gore, and began to cry. Next thing I remember, I was running, Dick's heavy feet pounding the ground right on my heels as I sprinted headlong through the woods. Bursting into the clearing, my foot caught on a branch, and I fell hard, feeling something in my wrist break. I forced myself to my feet and kept running for the car. Dick reached it and flung open the door, leaping in, and I reached it moments after. Holding my arm as pain lanced through me, I turned to look behind me for Harry, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Get in," Dick hissed, his tone bordering on hysterical. I wasn't listening. I couldn't abandon Harry. I wouldn't. "Harry," I yelled, looking around desperately for any sign of him, but nothing. Not even the sound of nighttime animals, and finally defeated, I climbed back into the car. Dick was sobbing, and my breath was coming in sharp, pained breaths. What happened? Tom almost screamed, turning to look from me to Dick and back again. He got no answer instead. Dick swore, slamming his fist into the back of the seat, gripped by some type of panicked fit, and I was pretty sure I was about to throw up. What happened? He was fully screaming now. A mix of fear and anger etched on his face as he looked from me to Dick. "Something got Harry," I managed to hiss out between clenched teeth. "You left him?" Tom spluttered, clearly not getting how bad the situation was. "Opened him up." We all went silent like a switch had been thrown at the faint sound of Harry's voice, but it wasn't right. It was oddly blank and toneless, and the delivery was stilted and awkward. Turning, I could see him at the edge of the clearing, holding his stomach as if he were about to be sick. Then he seemed to shake himself and stand up straight. Walking closer, I could faintly hear him mumble, "Opened up," wordlessly and almost without thought. I found myself leaning forward and fumbling for the door lock in the front seat. "What are you doing?" Tom hissed, sounding scandalized at my actions. "Open up," he said, walking up to the car window and leaning down to look in like a cop writing us a ticket, only he was wearing a dirty shirt and smiling like something was physically pulling back his cheeks. "Open up," he spoke again, almost naturally. Tom reached across for the lock, but found himself pinned by Dick, who held his arm to the dash, crouched forward and shaking. He had a wild, half-crazed look in his eyes, and his voice was faint and breathless as he whispered, "That's not him, man. Come on, guys." Harry slurred these words from outside the window, then seemed to shift as he finished, "Open up." His tone now totally natural. Then he repeated, "Come on, guys, open up." Almost perfectly natural, calm, and cheerful as he stared unblinkingly into the window. A long few minutes passed as we sat frozen. The thing that used to be our friend calmly looking in as we waited. His speech grew more natural, and he started to talk coherently. "Real funny joke, guys, but come on now. Just let me in. Let me in." He began to chant, growing more frantic with every repetition, that death mask grin never slipping an inch as he started to shout, "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." On the final sound, he made a noise between a laugh and a scream and began to beat his head against the door until red blood ran down the glass. Then for an instant he looked confused, the smile finally falling from his face as he mouthed one word clearly through the glass. An instant later the smile was back and wider than before. Muscles on his neck stood out and began to twitch under the strain as he fell back and began to writhe on the ground as if having a seizure. The word that he mouthed to us in that moment of clarity was, "Run." We all listened to our friend for the last time and scrambled out the doors on the far side of the car, bolting for the direction of the access road that led out of the park. Or at least I thought we all did. But as I reached the last turn before the car would be out of sight and glanced back, I saw Tom on the ground and something white, naked and fleshy forcing itself into his mouth while Harry held him down. My feet pounded into the gravel road and my chest burned with overexertion. The pure fire of adrenaline sang in my veins, pushing me beyond what I could do and into an area where I risked hurting myself if I continued. But I didn't care. Dick was a few feet ahead of me, head down and sprinting for his life as we passed the dark silhouette of the bathhouse and rushed towards the entrance of the campsite. We stumbled to a stop, realizing we were not alone. A figure was crouched in the middle of the entrance, its head cocked like a curious animal as it watched us. The shadows of the trees played a camouflage pattern of dark and light across its pale, sagging skin, and a long pink tongue lolled from its grinning mouth and over one of its eyes. Its head was twisted so that they looked out from beneath the mouth, and a mane of dark wild hair fell from that to the ground. It didn't move, just sat watching us. Dick didn't say anything, just sank to his feet and began to quietly sob. I looked around for an escape and saw Tom and Harry standing behind us, slowly walking forward. Harry with a natural gait, while Tom limped and spasmed unnaturally, though even as I watched seemed to grow more coordinated. "Come on, we've gotta go," I hissed, trying to pull Dick to his feet, but he had always been larger than me, and limp as he was, it was like lifting a sack of wet dirt. "Wake me up," he muttered incoherently as I tried to pull him to his feet, but all I managed to do was overbalance both of us, and we fell to the roadbed. The pain of landing again on my broken arm caused a galaxy of stars to explode inside my head. White, hot lines of anger lancing up my arm and into my chest, but I didn't have time to pass out. So I forced myself to my feet, swaying drunkenly as I tried to catch my breath. Tom and Harry were closer now, though the beast still watched silently, its crooked head giving off an almost bored energy. "Dick, we have to go," I shouted in his ear, but he didn't react or seem to hear me. There was one last thing I could think to do, so I pulled back my leg and kicked him hard in the mouth. There was a crunch, and blood poured from broken teeth, but through the pain and confusion in his eyes, I could see his mind return. "Come on," I shouted, grabbing for his arm with my good hand. Slowly, he pulled himself to his feet, almost bringing me down again. But we stood, and after a moment of unsteadiness began to move towards the edge of the woods. At first limping, and then stumbling and finally running, we crashed through the Underbrush, my mind using the pain of twigs slashing at my face to refocus itself. Eventually, exhaustion, aided by the realization that we were hopelessly lost, forced us to stop and take stock of where we were. We were alone in a tree-shaded hollow formed by two moss-covered boulders leaning against each other. Shaking from exertion, I leaned against one and slid to the ground, letting its cool surface ground me in reality. "Where are we?" Dick asked after a long time of tense silence. "I don't know." I wheezed, my chest still burning and my heart racing like I was about to die from the wild run in the dark, far more exercise than I was used to. Hysterically, a useless part of my mind promised to buy a treadmill if I ever lived the rest of my mind condemning it for wasting time, which was equally useless in our situation. We're miles from the road. His voice was sluggish and whistled oddly through the broken teeth as he talked. It was clear that even the few words he had said were torture for him, and I felt a stab of guilt go through me. "Sorry," I started, but he cut me off with a shake of his head. "Not important." His slurred voice turning the syllables into separate words. Then he glanced around at the thick trees. Instantly my body tensed, ready to resume our run, but walking over to a large pine, whose lower few feet were scarred by the horns of deer. "Look, for road," he mumbled, pointing up at the tree and testing a deep gouge for footing as he spoke. "No," I hissed, "it's not safe." He responded with a painful sound that I think was supposed to be a laugh. Slowly, he pulled himself up until he could reach a branch. Unsteadily, he yanked himself onto it before pausing a moment to catch his breath, then repeated the process, moving higher. I should be the one to climb. I was smaller and lighter, but with my broken wrist I could never make it off the ground. Slowly, I watched as he faded into the shadow of the upper branches. The occasional grunt of effort and the swaying of the pine, the only indications that he was still on this planet. "What are you doing?" came a toneless, choppy voice from behind me, and spinning on my feet, I saw him. Tom was standing a few feet away, smiling like the Cheshire Cat. His unblinking eyes slowly moving from me to the tree and back. My back was to the boulder, and the thing that used to be my friend was in front of me. I had nowhere to go, and the fear and exhaustion seemed to fade as a sudden calm flowed from somewhere within me. The realization that I was about to die was freeing in an unpleasant way. "What are you going to do?" Tom asked, his voice somewhere between a robot and a mocking tone. It enraged me to hear this monster pretend to be my friend. So as it lunged, I shifted to the side and pushed off with my feet. My broken wrist was crushed against the rock, and for maybe half a second, my world went dark. As my eyes focused, I watched the twisted Tom Thing's head smash into the rock, its neck turning at an angle with a sickening crack like firewood. It seemed to shake spasmodically as it collapsed into a limp heap at the base of the rock, and to my shock, I saw tears in his dying eyes. Then he screamed, "John, run." Dick was a few branches us now, and he screamed for me to run. But it made no sense. Why should I run? The feeling in my arm had gone beyond pain into some new, indescribable sensation, and the cool ground felt good against my face. Running would require an effort I simply did not possess. Almost lazily, my eyes drifted to Tom and I tried to focus on him. Something was happening. His crumpled form seemed to twist from within as blood began to stain his shirt. Dick leapt from the bottom branch to the ground, throwing up a cloud of leaves. I heard a sound of pain. Limping over, he grabbed me and, as I had done to him before, he screamed for me to run. I couldn't. My eyes refused to leave Tom. A burst of blood and some other fluid gushed from the wound to mingle on the ground as a dozen little things spilled out from under his shirt. They were twisted, half-formed abortions that screamed with a wailing cry as they flopped on the ground. Even so, This close, I could tell that they were baby versions of the twisted man thing that I had seen the previous night, and had again blocked our way to the road. I remember that I screamed, but nothing after that for a span of minutes at least. Next thing I know for sure that isn't an image or sound disjointed from context in my mind is that I was running through the dark woods, or quickly limping at least. I had an arm around Dick's shoulder, and somehow I knew he had hurt his ankle jumping from the tree, though I couldn't remember how. There was a knife-sharp line between seeing the dying baby things and now, where I knew I had lost time in between. It didn't matter. Tom was dead. Really dead. And as I stumbled through the trees, I had to fight to not let the grief overwhelm me. He had been my friend, but like Harry, he was gone. Dick had seen the road close to where we were when he reached the top of the tree, and we were limping now towards it. Some distance behind us I heard the sound of a thing running full sprint through the woods. It was getting closer, but we couldn't move any faster. Dick's feet slipped, and his weight caught me, and soon we were both falling. We hit the ground and rolled into something cool and wet. A creek bed, some small voice in my mind observed. I couldn't even feel pain at that point. It was as if my nerves had burned away. Just a distant sensation of wrongness told me how bad my arm was. Shifting from where I lay, I stared up. There was something warm in my eyes, and they were having trouble focusing. Still atop the bank, I could see the form of Harry smiling down at us. His shirt hung open, revealing the swollen flesh below, pregnant with more of the nascent things that grew in blood and pus. Tom opened up too soon, he said matter-of-factly, but nothing was making sense anymore. I felt stunned. I felt disconnected. I felt high. I felt like my mind had broken under the weight of all I had seen, and I was analytically watching myself go insane from behind my own eyes. I didn't care. Dick screamed, a feral, inhuman sound, and flung a rock at the hairy thing's head. It impacted with a thud and left a visible dent, but it didn't flinch as the rock bounced away. Still, Dick roared, until the rough sound of it made me sure he was damaging his throat, hurling anything he could reach in a frantic attempt to die. Fighting. I only shuddered quietly as I willed myself to my feet. Harry's movements grew unsteady as Dick's projectiles did damage to his dead body. I knew it was too late. I half walked, half fell up the other bank of the creek, my feet on autopilot as my eyes tried to focus on a gap in the brush where I could see a red reflective stop sign. Two screams followed each other in quick succession. Behind me, one I knew to be Harry finally hatching. I could only hope that Dick had killed him and caused the things to spew out prematurely, like with Tom for a moment, because the hoarse sound of Dick's final wail dispelled any hope. I could hear them gurgling behind me, like the random sounds of an infant and the chittering of an insect as I stumbled towards the stop sign, towards salvation. Beyond them, I heard another sound, a deep guttural growl that I could only assume was coming from some older, darker thing. I didn't care. If I could reach the red sign, I would be fine. It glowed like a beacon even as the roar got louder. Then there was a squeal, high-pitched and unmistakably man-made, before everything went dark. The driver's panicked voice as she fussed over me blurs into the sound of the paramedic shouting numbers as I was wheeled under some artificial light. A confusing slideshow of disjointed images and words is all I have for what feels like a long time after that. Blood loss. A dark figure looks down at me, momentarily blocking the light. Severe concussion. A stabbing pain, then a feeling of cool numbness flowing from it. Have to. Sweet, narcotic darkness. I woke days later in the county hospital, confused and in pain. They had taken my arm. They had taken my friends. I was alone. The police came later. Time still wasn't making sense and asked more questions than I could keep track of. It took a while before I understood that they suspected I had killed my friends. I guess technically I had killed Tom at least. Or had I? No. That thing with the twisted head, the mother of all those foul infants, it was the killer. the monster, the demon. Eventually, they went away, and I learned later that the investigation had been dropped after the coroner examined the bodies. He killed himself, I think. Nothing much made sense for a long time. Everything was still a blur of doctors and nurses and cops and people I don't remember flitting in and out of my memory like ghosts. Ghosts? I am haunted by ghosts. My oldest and best friends taken from me by whatever that was. Eventually, my mind almost began to work again, and the doctors sounded less worried when they spoke about me. A few weeks more and they released me to go home. I called a cab. It drove me from the hospital up my driveway and stopped in front of my house. Then it left and took me to the ferry terminal, where with just the clothes on my back I purchased a ticket and left the island I had lived on all my life. Hanging over my garage from rusty tacks, I used to hold up Christmas lights with 3 little metal figures, twisting in the wind. We thought the only thing to fear in Antarctica was the cold. We were wrong. The cold doesn't kill, that thing does.